Hi guys, this is a quick video explaining part 1 of the marketing strategy group assignment. I'm going to talk about 3 things today. The first is part 1 of the assignment, which is essentially the industry and company analysis explained. Then we'll take a look at the strategic marketing framework and recap that concept that was covered in the introductory lecture. And finally, I will outline a project roadmap, including where the first peer evaluation falls into the group assignment. So, as you can see in the marking rubric, which is available in the group assignment details on Canvas, we start off with an internal analysis of the business. So that's worth 20 points of the 100 points. And within that, this is essentially the strengths and weaknesses of your case company. We want you to think very carefully about the case company you select, because once you submit part 1, you can't change the case company anymore. So part 2 will obviously be based on part 1, and so once you've settled on part 1, the case company, you are essentially stuck with it. So within the internal analysis, you're looking at, as I mentioned, strengths and weaknesses, as well as what their competitive advantage is and their USP, or unique selling proposition. So for those of you that have access to a local company or access to the CEO or the owner of the company, this gives you a distinct advantage, because you can obviously ask that person or the company about some of this information, provided it's not commercially sensitive or that they're happy to share that information with you. For those of you that are selecting a multinational company, it may be more difficult to get a one-to-one relationship with someone that can give you that information, but there should be information or secondary data available. And worst case scenario, you can look at the company's website. So really, we're not too fussed what type of company you choose for part 1 or for the whole assignment. We're pretty flexible. We've never said no to any particular company. So it's really up to you and your team to decide if you want to go local or international, if you want to go with a company that has a lot of publicly available data, or if you want a company that no one's heard of and you have access to the owner of the business. In the past, we've had anything from the classic big companies like Air New Zealand and Apple and Nike, all the way down to a local restaurant in one of the group members' neighborhood, or a family business that one of the team members happens to work for. So really up to you guys, and we want you to choose a company that you're passionate about. The second part of the marketing rubric is the internal analysis, and this, as you can tell, forms a massive chunk of part 1. So with this, and the reason why it covers a massive chunk is because it covers a lot of material. So this includes all the macro environmental factors through to the key competitors, as well as obviously the customers, right, forming a critical part of this external analysis. So you'd spend most of your time working on part 1 within this sort of external analysis component. And I'll talk a bit later on about how you will end up with a ton of information. And so really, part 1 is testing the skill of being able to focus that information and really draw attention to the key external components that matter to the specific case company that you've selected. Moving on from that, we've got key challenges. So this is only worth 15 points, but it's obviously very important. Based on the internal analysis and the external analysis, you should be able to come up with 3 key challenges for the case company. Now, the thing to note here is that those key challenges are permitted to change for part 2, because strategy is adaptive sometimes. We wouldn't want you to lock you to a decision about 3 challenges if those challenges are no longer relevant by the time it comes to writing part 2 of the assignment. So whatever you come up with for the key challenges in part 1 do not need to be set in stone for part 2. However, when we're grading you on the key challenges, we'll obviously look for challenges that make sense given the internal and external analysis you've drawn our attention to. And the final 2 components of the marking rubric for part 1 is presentation and grammar, as well as referencing. So in terms of presentation and grammar, you've only got a very limited amount of words to explain the internal and external situation of the company, as well as what the 3 key challenges are. So that writing has to be very concise, very accurate, and not waffly in any sense. So we want these reports of part 1 to be very pithy and very tight in what we receive. And in terms of referencing, because a lot of the data and information you use to back up your external analysis will be sourced probably from the internet, we want you to reference those sources. And sometimes it'll be popular media, it could be magazines, it could be news coverage, and hopefully, because this is a university level course, at other times it should be some academic articles that are being used to back up your claims. So a combination of either is fine for this report, as long as you reference all the sources you use. So if we look at the next slide, it is the marketing framework. And this might seem familiar to you because I did present that in either lecture 1 or 2. And it's a giant framework considering all the various aspects of marketing that you need to worry about when you put together a marketing plan. With relation to part 1, we're mainly interested in this top half of that framework. Whereas part 2 will take all the research and analysis that you've done in part 1 and develop some tactics and things that you can actually implement. So don't worry too much about that. I want you to focus on that top half. And if we'll see that it starts off with corporate level strategy, strategic business units, and down to the product. So very early on, you have to decide in your case which of those levels you're wanting to target your report towards. So an example is last semester we had people that selected Unilever or Procter & Gamble, some of those big multinationals, and their question was, are we doing the strategic analysis about Unilever, the big corporation, or are we looking at a specific product within Unilever, such as Rexona or Lynx? And my answer to them was, it's up to you. So you just let us know whether you're taking a corporate strategy approach or product level approach. And then once you've settled on that, then stick with it. And then the rest of the framework is, relevant to that particular level of strategy you've decided to analyze in accordance with the rest of your teammates. So once you get there, then it makes it much easier to go through and try and figure out some problems that particular brand might be facing, or the product, or the corporation, right? Think about objectives for later on for part 2, but don't worry too much about that at this stage. So remember, this framework wasn't designed with the specific assignment you have. It's designed for a general approach to marketing strategy for any business. So some of those things won't be as relevant to you for part 1 of your report. So if you stick to the marking rubric, you'll cover everything you need to cover. Don't get too hung up on the various little bits and pieces of this framework. This framework is simply a good all-in-one place to have a look at and to consider whether you've taken everything into account or not. But in saying that, we're not going to be grading you based on your coverage of this framework. The internal analysis, which I did mention, is part of that marking rubric. So that's asking you to analyze the business in terms of its assets, its core competencies, capabilities, its strengths, its weaknesses, etc. So those of you that have access to the CEO of the company, or some person that has a foot in the door of the company, will have better access to this information, right? And so that was one of the recommendations. We said that it was a advantage to work with a local business that you have contact with. But even if you've gone for an international business that you don't have any hope in actually contacting, there's still secondary data you can hope to get about that business. And then where appropriate, you may have to make some assumptions, but just make it known to us that where something is based on data versus based on assumptions. And this half is the significant portion of external analysis, and so we've listed within that some common tools. Now, some of these tools are mentioned in your marking rubric, and so for those cases you should look at using those tools, because it's a good way of organizing the masses of information you will get when you do an external analysis of your company and its specific sector. So you could use Pestit or you could use Pestle. We're not too fussed either one. They kind of cover the same thing. You could also use Porter's 5 forces if relevant. We want you to look at the market and the sub-market. Definitely look at a competitor analysis. And then finally, don't forget the customer, right? Because they're very important in terms of coming up with those key challenges for your case company. Now, one important question I do get is, when we do this external analysis, do we do it like a general external analysis of just business and society in general, or about the sector in general, or should it be an external analysis that's more specific to the case company and its particular positioning within its sector? My advice is to go with the latter. So when you do an external analysis, there's going to be a ton of information, and what you want to do is narrow it down and focus on the bits in the external environment that are particularly relevant to your case company. Because this will be important for two reasons. One, it'll minimize the amount of information you're trying to share with us because you only have 2 pages. And two, it'll make those recommendations and challenges a lot easier to formulate and defend, because instead of blowing a whole bunch of information at us and trying to get us to figure out which is relevant, you're telling us what's relevant to your specific case. And in consulting, that's what you want to do as well. You could talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but there's only really time and attention that the client can focus on what's relevant to their business. So we want you to approach the external analysis from that mindset. All right, so the top 2 sections of this slide are relevant to part 1, but the bottom 3 boxes are not. So value analysis and drivers of value, this will come from your external analysis of the customer and also the competitors, because value is always in relation to what the competitors can offer the customers. So if you do part 1 properly, you will be able to cover, let me just try this thing here. There's a pen apparently, there we go. So this part here, like that, yeah. So that part there is in part 1, and everything below it is not quite yet relevant, because this stuff here, such as how we differentiate ourselves from competitors and etc., that is, save that for part 2. Okay, so just to reiterate, this stuff here is good for part 1, and this stuff down here not so much. Hopefully that makes sense. And finally, the tactics, which form that last part of the marketing framework, will also form part 2 of your report, where you actually suggest what they should do based on the challenges you've identified. Right, in terms of how the team project will play out for the entire semester, right now we're in week 1, week 2-ish, so at this stage we just want you to start finding like-minded students. We talked about how there are different streams set up, the high engagement, standard engagement, and competing priority stream in another video that I posted. So we want you to find the stream that best represents your life circumstances, and then obviously get into a team of 6, and then as a team settle on the case company. So this will take a while, because remember, once you decide on the case company and you start working on part 1, that's it, you can't change the company at that point. Then essentially from weeks 4 and 5 and into the mid-semester, you're going to be working on part 1, and that's submitted this semester within the mid-semester break because of the way Easter falls. But once that's submitted, it gives us a bit of time to grade over the break, and hopefully we can get your feedback returned to you guys so that you can start working on part 2, which is the strategic decision-making report. Now, in that middle point, once you've submitted part 1, we will also launch a peer evaluation, where we're going to ask you to do an informal evaluation of your teammates, and this will help us this will help flag to us or signal to us any issues within the teams that are happening, so that we can get on top of it quickly. Now, these first peer evaluations do not affect anyone's grades in any way. They're just simply a signal for us to touch base with teams that don't seem to be working, even though theoretically everyone should be streamed into groups of like-minded students. Following the mid-semester break, we have week 7, 8, and 9, where you'll be working pretty hard on the strategic decision-making report. So this is part 2. I mentioned before how some of those challenges may have changed in part 1 based on the feedback we've given you, as well as the circumstances of the world we live in. So you have a chance to adjust your 3 key challenges, and I will post another video explaining how part 2 works. So don't worry about that too much at this point, because you're focusing on the first half of the course. Then in week 10 we have the presentations, and once again there'll be more information to follow on that. There's nothing in week 11 because I realize many of you have other group assignments that you will be handing in at that time. So we want you to take a break in week 11, work on your other assignments or do other presentations for the other courses you are doing, as well as prepare for that final test in week 12. And in addition to the final test, which everyone has in week 12, the top 10 teams that will be selected as a result of part 2 will be invited to a showcase event in the evening of week 12 after the final test. So the theory is that everyone will be here, hopefully, at uni, depending on the lockdown level, for the final test, and those that are in the top 10 teams will have an additional reward or responsibility that evening. Obviously, if any of this stuff changes due to the pandemic, then we have contingencies in place and we'll be able to sort everything out. No worries at all. So thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing everyone at the future lectures that I hold.